Hi everyone and welcome back to my channel. I am super excited for my next project, which is going to be a skirt. I have this vision of a really frilly and flowy skirt, which I'm going to use this fabric that I've had for a while now, and this is a very flowy drapey fabric, so I think this will be perfect for that skirt. And also with winter and fall coming up, I feel like it's gonna make a really nice aesthetically pleasing skirt that goes along with those vibes. And yeah, I'm just really excited. I think it will be a pretty simple skirt. It might be time consuming and tedious, but I think it will turn out really cute. So yeah, let's get started. So I cut out my fabric with the waist portion being 24.5 inches and the length 21 inches along the side diagonals. I cut out two of these pieces, one for the front and one for the back. And with the rest of my fabric, I cut out 3.75 inch wide strips, and I made as many as I could with the fabric I had left. I ripped these strips out because that's a lot easier than cutting all of them out, and it would ensure that they are all perfectly on grain. And then I also kept a strip for the waistband, which was a bit less than 4 inches. And these are all my strips that I had. I had so many, I thought this would be plenty, but as you'll see later, it wasn't quite enough. I began by putting together the side seams of the skirt by French seams. In case you don't know what that is, it's when you put the wrong size together to sew the seam before trimming down the seam allowance and sewing it right size together in order to encase the raw edges. And then I took a little break to add a lining to a different skirt I made some time ago. While I was making this skirt, I didn't think it needed a lining, but now I realized that it did, so I really wished I added it in while I was making it because that would have been a lot easier. Going back to the skirt I'm currently making, I went on to hemming the bottom. This isn't a very good shot, so sorry about that, but it was just basically a normal hem that I make on basically everything else I make.
So we're doing a water balloon challenge. The loser gets squatted by the hose. So we are throwing water balloons to each other. First one to drop it loses and gets squatted.
Now I went on to tackling the ruffles, which I had a lot of, so this would be the most time-consuming part. I began by sewing all the ends together, again using French seams, and then hemming both long edges. This was a lot of hemming, and as you will see later, I'm gonna have to do a lot more of it. But once all this hemming was all done, this is what I had. A very long strip of fabric. And to gather all of this into ruffles, I set my sewing machine to the highest tension with the longest stitch length and sewed along the center of the ruffles. The high tension with the long stitch length should naturally gather up the fabric as you put it through the machine, and you can control how ruffled you want it by adjusting those two things. But I wanted mine very ruffled, so that's why I made it the highest tension with the longest stitch length. But you can do whatever you want. And as you can probably guess, I did this for the full length of the ruffles until the whole thing was just beautiful little frilly ruffles. And to make sure that all the gathers would stay in place exactly as they were ruffled into, I did go over it with just a regular straight stitch, just reinforcing all the ruffles so that they would all stay in place. And then I pinned the completed ruffles onto the skirt base. I was originally planning to do rings of ruffles down the skirt, but it wasn't looking like I would have enough ruffles for that, so I made it spiral down instead. I'm glad I did it that way because it was easier this way anyways, and I think it looks pretty cool. And then my school's administration staff asked me to make them custom ties, so I made a design they liked and then got that custom printed onto fabric and then made some ties with it. This was my first time making ties, but I'm pretty happy with how they turned out. And when I gave it to them, they were also really happy with how it turned out, so I was really glad. And then I also vendored at the holiday market selling my crochet and beaded items, though it was mostly crochet. And this is what my booth looked like. This was my first time ever doing something like this, but it actually went really well. And now for the skirt, which this video is actually supposed to be about. So I sewed on the ruffles at school, so I don't have any footage of that. But after adding the ruffles, I didn't really like the gaps between the spirals. I wanted the skirt to be filled with ruffles, but obviously I didn't have any more of the fabric, so I decided to use this contrasting color, which I had a lot of. I was contemplating using pink instead of this white, but I decided that I wanted to keep the whole skirt in neutral colors. And I basically repeated the same exact thing as the previous ruffles to make these, and then pinned them to the skirt to fill in the gaps. I sewed this on at school as well, and then I went on to making the lining. But this is what all the ruffles on the skirt was looking like. For the lining, I just traced the skirt onto a bedsheet, but making it a little bit shorter than the actual skirt. The waist also doesn't have to be the exact same length because it's all going to be gathered up anyways. I put the lining together just like the main one with French seams and then a hem along the bottom. Then I put the lining into the main skirt and sewed along the waist, which I did at school, so you can't really see me do that either, but yes, that's what I did. And then I took the waistband and added in my little tag, making sure it would end up on the inside of the skirt. I also sewed the whole waistband part at school, but basically I first sewed it into a closed loop and then sewed it right sides together with the skirt, making sure the seam of the waistband was in the center back. I normally use the stitch in the ditch method to sew the other side of the waistband after folding in the raw edges to the wrong side, but this time I ended up hand sewing it in place. I sewed it onto the lining so that none of the stitching was visible from the outside, as you can see here. And I also left a portion of the waistband unsewn so that there was an opening for me to thread through my 1-inch elastic, which I did by putting a safety pin onto the end to thread it through. Sorry, it was really hard to film and thread it with one hand. And then as the final step, I stretched and sewed 2 parallel lines onto the waistband so that the skirt would remain evenly gathered. I recommend steaming it as well to make it nicer and more elasticated. And that completes the skirt. I really like how it turned out, though I would say it is a bit heavier than a normal skirt just because of all the ruffles on it. But I'm really glad I made contrasting colored ruffles. I think it adds that little something extra that wouldn't be there if it was all the same color. I can definitely see myself getting a lot of wear out of this, and I'm just so excited to be able to wear this wherever I go. Thank you for sticking to the end, and see you next time!